apologize. Rula Lamin would not be able to come because a while ago she said she apologized for not coming. And, but we have a very exciting panel. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome this panel, this plenary, three distinguished speakers who work extensively on the region. First, by political orders, Carol Malou Salan, who writes regularly for the Daily Telegraph on the issues of our region. She's also a lecturer at the EU. Kawa Hassan is a visiting scholar at Carnegie Middle East Center. He's based in The Hague, and he works on the think tank on the Middle East. His work is focused on Kurdish and Iraqi politics, on civil society and democratization, on donor assistance transition process in the Middle East. Sam Dagan is a Middle East correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. He's based in Damascus and Beirut. Okay? He joined the Wall Street Journal in August 2010 in Iraq, where he was working since October 2003 for the Agence France-Presse Arabie, and he wrote for the Christian Science Monitor and the New York Times. I warmly welcome you to this honor. The Arab world is in a disarray. The Bronze Spring developed into a competition to go back to the first millennia. Sykes-Picot is gradually changing from being a hated scheme to divide the Arab world into a desired concept for unity. Concepts such as freedom, democracy, transparency, accepting the different other, once desired targets for most Arabs, they now exist only in Lebanon and with great difficulties. Iraq is the latest breakdown. Now that Joe Biden is as Vice President, 2006 proposal to have federal Iraq is online to be implemented. Kurdistan is to have shortly a referendum, possibly. We'll hear from Kawa for independence. ISIL or ISIS is the last S is for Syria, which is the case. Sham is the Levant, right? ISIL is fighting the central government of Iraq, which is being run by caretaker government, since the Iraq is not yet on new leaders. Neighboring states to Iraq are pursuing their own agenda by continuing their rivalry as usual. The US, on the other hand, so far is doing nothing. All of these issues and others will be the subject of discussion with our guests. We start with Mr. Kawa Hassan. He's going to talk to us about Kurdistan and its relations with Iraq. I think this is a subject we all don't know very much. We know that a lot of Lebanese go to Erbil and work, Mondam Hamid here. Okay. And they like it there and so on, but they don't know the problems that exist. So I'll keep to you later. I mean, we're going to talk about Iraq, so you can talk about Kurdistan, about Baghdad, about Basra, whichever it is.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this invitation, and I'm really honored to be here today. I was supposed to talk about what is happening in Iraq and ISIS, IS, IL, but after we had a talk with His Excellency, he said, why don't we talk about Kurdistan? So I prepared a presentation, so I have to change that a bit. So what is happening in Iraq and what is happening in Kurdistan? As you all know that after the takeover in Mosul, that was quite a dramatic development, not only for Iraq but also for Kurdistan. And I would like to start with a quote from Lenin. Not that I'm a fan of him, but I think it summarizes what is happening nowadays. he once said there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. And I think that applies to what is happening in Iraq these days. Too much is happening too quickly, and making sense of it is, it's not only difficult for outside observers, but also for the people of Iraq and also the Iraqi players. It's very difficult to make sense of it. Now, going back to Kurdistan, it was really for, I was in Kurdistan when Mosul fell, and it reminded me of a similar event in 1991 in Kurdistan. And after the Gulf War, as you know, there was a Kurdish uprising in the north and a Shia uprising in the south. And I was in Soleimani at the time where I was raised. And the Iraqi army collapsed in a matter of days. And I think what happened in Mosul, the 10th of June, is quite similar to what happened back then. And the speed with which the Iraqi army collapsed in Mosul and the speed with which the Iraqi army collapsed back then, there are very striking similarity between those two milestone events. Now the impact on Adnan said in Sharq al-Awsat, I heard a friend of mine, he said actually what happened on the 10th of June is he compared it to 1967. About the impact and the speed with the Iraqi army collapse and its wider implication for the entire region. I'm not sure if everybody will agree with that, but anyhow, it gives an idea about the impact of the 10th of June as a milestone date in the history of Iraq and the region. Now going back to Kurdistan. As you know, the events in Mosul and later on the rest of Iraq has accelerated the calls for independence. And President Barzani was in the parliament last week, and he called on the parliament to take measures to start referendum about the status of Kurdistan. And today I was reading in Al-Hayat that the Iranian ambassador was in Soleimani yesterday and before yesterday. And what I read in Hayat is that, according to Hayat, that he delivered a very blunt message to Kurdish politicians. And he told them that if you will declare independence, very clearly we will close all the borders, and we will support anyone, any Iraqi, any groups who will be against this state. And so that was a clear message from Iran. Turkey's position, like 2 weeks back, was much more clear in the sense of they might support a Kurdish state. I heard that foreign minister said something differently 2 days back, a bit retracted from his previous statements. But what about the Kurds themselves? I think if you ask any Kurd in any part of different parts of Kurdistan, and nowadays also Iraq, what do you want? They would say clearly, we want independence. That's clear cut. The issue is not if they want a state, but when. The Chinese is more when that state would be realized. But I think there are divisions also within the Kurds, the Kurdish political groups about the issue of independence. Reading the Kurdish media over the last 2 weeks, particularly within the PUK, Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, President Taliban, there were some quite deep divisions about going for a referendum or trying first, talk to Baghdad and try to find a kind of a formula for first to try to find a solution for the problems with Baghdad. So, and so much so that in the last 2 days, 3 high-ranking members of PUK had to issue 3 different statements, reiterating that they are in favor of a Kurdish, the idea of referendum and state, and that they are not outside an ijma al-Kurdi. that's the position within PUK. Obviously, KDP, President Barzani is, of course, he's in favor of independence. Hashd Tahrir, the previous biggest party, position is also in favor of, while they don't, they don't announce it that clearly, but they are in favor. The Islamist party too. But there is a very lively debate about is it the right time to go ahead with the referendum, and are we really ready to announce a state right now? Isn't it better to try to try to solve the problems with Baghdad, and then after that try to go for the option of an independent state? The views are really quite polarizing. I mean, within the Kurdish community. But some people would say it's a bargaining chip used by the authorities to maybe extract some concessions on Article 140 and some other issues. But I think that might be the case, but there's also, people have high expectations, and there has been a lot of mobilization in Kurdistan for the issue of independence, mainly by Kurdistan Democratic Party and President Barzani. So it would be interesting to see how, in case they won't go ahead with the referendum, and there won't be any international backing for that idea, how the authorities will deal with that. But I personally think, as a researcher, I think declaring an independent state needs a lot of preparations. You can't just do it like that. And it's much better to do it peacefully in negotiations with other parties, with Baghdad, with neighboring countries, to garner international support. And that's possible because the momentum is there, the understanding is there. I mean, the understanding for the Kurdish issue has increased dramatically over the last 20 years, particularly since in the last, over this past 1 month, the idea of Kurdish independence is one of the main themes in international media. So there is much more understanding for that. But for that, to arrive at that point, Kurds need to have first put their house in order, to have complete consensus about that idea, and to have a clear-cut idea, and an action plan, how to arrive there, how to prepare the grounds for that, politically, economically, and socially. So on that note, I'll finish my talk. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question before you? What about the position of the Americans and the Europeans and the Saudis as well? Of course, we know that Netanyahu supported independent analysis.
Well, I was so surprised by what I heard about support from Netanyahu and Shimon Peres, because actually the Kurds didn't ask for that. I mean, I was so surprised and shocked. And this is the kiss of death for the idea of independent Kurdistan. The Kurds have bitter experiences with Israel in the 70s, So that's on Israel. And of course, the views in Kurdistan is again divided on this issue. There's a very small minority which says it's a good idea that they support us, but the overwhelming majority are not in favor of that. As far as the US is concerned, their position is very clear. They stated once again that they are in favor of unified Iraq, and that Kurds and Baghdad, or even Baghdad, should try to solve the outstanding issues. So that is the position of US. Saudi Arabia, I haven't seen any statements from Saudi Arabia, but President Sisi clearly said what he thinks of the idea of independent Kurdistan.
Okay. In Do I need the microphone? Okay. I came back from Erbil almost 4 or 5 days ago, and a lot of things were mentioned in His Excellency's Ambassador's opening speech and in my colleagues. When we talk about the most dramatic developments, in my opinion, if you talk to the people, it's really not dramatic. What happened was the result of 10 years of failed policies in Iraq, starting with the Americans, with the invasion in 2003, up to the withdrawal and the free hand that was given to Iran to manage Iraqi affairs. And this is not coming from me, and this is not my opinion. This is what we heard different Sunni leaders or tribal leaders, or even the leader of the Iraqi Islamic Party, the Islamic Party of Iraq, Dr. Ahmed al-Abash, who was on the U.S. most wanted list. I think he was number 41, and he was in prison for 2 years by the Americans. And it was very interesting to hear him say that the U.S. policies on Iraq were even better than those of Maliki. So this says a lot about how Maliki governed Iraq in those 5 to 6 years. I'd like to take the headlines that were discussed. So what the Joe Biden plan and the Kurdish referendum and ISIL and all that. We need to put it in a context. We all know that things don't happen they didn't start from a vacuum. And I think that both the Iraqi government and the neighboring countries and the US and the West have failed in identifying or acting on the indicators that were clearly visible over the last few years. And if any of you heard the British ambassador to Iraq speak to Christian Amanpour, I think yesterday or the day before, and he clearly said that they had warned the central government of the growing influence of ISIS in that region, but Maliki wouldn't really do anything about it. So first, let's all agree that security comes from a political consensus. So if there is a political consensus in the country, but it is true, there was no real political leadership that was taking Iraq in the right direction. I'd like to start with where, and I can have a few minutes just to chronologically go over what happened since the Anbar uprising at the end of 2012, and why the army totally collapsed, as we were saying, on the 10th of June, which was the turning point. The Anbar uprising started because of the crackdown that was happening in the region. People will tell you, and there are journalists in the room or people who have visited the area, you will clearly know that there is a limitation on movement. For example, at every few meters there's a checkpoint, people are strip searched, there's a constant harassment of the people living in that area, and they are always labeled as terrorists. So whether you're a terrorist or not living in that area, you always live with the stigma that you are or might be labeled as a terrorist. So if there is a suicide bombing, for example, and people are just in the neighboring stores, they will all be rounded up and taken and questioned and sometimes left there for days. So all those security crackdowns security was the number one issue that had started in Anbar. The second issue was the allocation of the budget from the central government. So that was also a very big problem. I believe Kurdistan gets 17%, Mosul or Ninawa gets 11%, and so on and so forth. This has not been also given to the local councils to develop their area. So there is also an economic and financial problem in addition to the security one. On the third level, which is the political one, the people, if you speak to Ali Hatem Suleiman, who is the the emir of Dulay, or his emir of all the representative of all the tribes in Anbar.
He says he is. You have to be careful.
Well, he says he is. He says he's one of them. We have to be careful, true, it is contested. But however, he still comes from there, and he's a leader. So that could put, his words in give it some credit.
He was actually one of the biggest supporters of Maliki at one point.
That's true, and he doesn't deny that. But I'm not going to be his.
You have to be very careful with the tribes. I mean, it's like this is the regime, as I say in Arabic.
Why this is true, but what I wanted to say is that if you speak to him while he was in favor and supporting Maliki, as you were saying at some point. However, what you're trying to say is that there has been a total disconnect, and this is the point I was trying to make irrespective of the person, that there is a disconnect between the people and the Sunni representatives that they have seen, especially in the latest elections. So people like Saleh al-Mutlaq, Osama al-Nujayfi, those leaders, the people in those provinces do not feel like they represent them anymore because of the failed policies that happened over the last 10 years. So the Anbar started, the problem started in Anbar as a civil, peaceful demonstration, and crackdown on it, and we all heard that at some point they carried the weapons, and there was a lot of fighting between the government forces, or as the Iraqis call it, the Maliki army. Nobody calls the Iraqi army. It's always referred to as Maliki army. So the Maliki army cracked down on Al-Anbar, and the siege that happened on Al-Anbar, the alternative to that siege in people's perceptions and the people that we've spoken to was to create a crack from Mosul. So there is the logic behind the uprising in Mosul, which was on the surface through social media and propaganda and a lot of phone calls, seemed to be ISIL-led. But however, it was also a popular uprising with all the tribes and the former Ba'athis, or as we call them, the Saddams. So it was, let's call it a coalition of the Sunni social fabric that led to that. So again, to go back, it was not really a dramatic development. The people who were following the news could have seen it coming. And we all knew that ISIL started in Iraq long before they went to Syria. So they had already a stronghold in that area. So this is just to put this a little bit into context. Now, if we move a little bit further north to the Kurdistan region, we all know that Kurdistan started exporting its oil from the Kharmala oil fields 2 months ago to Turkey. Now that was a clear indicator that they were heading towards something. Like you don't go and export oil because you don't want independence, so you pick. And 3 months ago, Barzani made it, long before the problem of Mosul happened, Barzani threatened to go to referendum after the elections if there is no proper central coalition government after the election that was formed. So, and there were threats to go to a referendum and independence before the Mosul problem happened. Now, Atil al-Nujayfi, the governor of Mosul, did some form of a musalaha with the Kurds. But when you look deeper, you find that there was an oil contract that was signed and agreed between, and it was him who told me this, so it's not through a third party, that they did a deal with the Kurds that they would develop oil fields in Mosul in the similar way that they would develop in Karbala and other places in Kurdistan. So now there is a geopolitical, if we talk geopolitics of oil, we realize that there's a geopolitical alliance between the Sunnis and the Kurds, and it's no surprise that today Maliki came out and said that all the terrorists are in Erbil. So vilifying them because of that makes a lot of sense in that context. So having said that, of course the Iraqi elections were the turning point nobody wanted Maliki to be in power anymore. He won 100 seats, couldn't set up a coalition. And all the intelligence reports led us to where we are today. I just have 2 more points and I will wrap this up. One, there is a common denominator between the Sunni fighters, that they all don't want Maliki or the Dawah or anyone who's currently in power, even from the Sunni ranks. So that is a common denominator between all the elements. The differences here are the not so friend of SANS, Ali Hassan Suleiman and Abash and the others who are calling for a federal system. So there are voices inside supportive of the Biden plan, including the Al-Tahrir Speaker of Parliament in Kurdistan, Youssef.
You mean the Speaker of Parliament?
Yes.
Youssef Sadegh.
Yes, Youssef Sadegh from Tahrir has written a thesis, his PhD thesis, which clearly said that there cannot be an independent Kurdistan without the breakup of Iraq. So this is already part of the Kurdish discussion that is happening, and what the Biden plan, and part of the Sunnis who want the federal system, and they would never accept that Iraqi army comes back to that area. On the other hand, and this is where I'm wrapping up, are the former Baathists and the Tariqa Naqshbandiyya, the followers of the Naqshbandis, the followers of Izzat al-Duri, who believe that Iraq should be one, and that they could, once the fall of Baghdad could signal their comeback, and then they could translate their military gains into political ones on the negotiated table. So today, within the Sunni ranks, there are those who favor division, and there are those who still want to see Iraq as one. And then we will develop all those ideas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Prince of Delane was a good friend of mine. I almost got killed because of him. I spent like almost half a day at his compound in Baghdad, and then it was a car bomb. Shortly, almost minutes after I left the compound. So anyway.
Glad you're here now.
Anyway, well, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Your Excellency, for your opening remarks, and thanks to the colleagues here for their remarks as well. Very insightful, valuable. What I'd like to add is, in order to understand what's happening in Iraq today, I agree with what Carol said. We have to understand what has been happening over the past at least decade. Let's remember the invasion of Iraq was hugely controversial in 2003. Some called it illegal, some called it wrong, morally wrong. I think irrespective of where we stand on that, inside Iraq at the time, there was almost, I would say, consensus among most Iraqis, be they Shia, Kurds, and Sunnis, that they wanted to build a new state, a new Iraqi state called Saddam. And there was a fair amount of optimism at the time. I think, unfortunately, a number of factors conspired at the time, be they the American mistakes that were made in managing the post-invasion Iraq, be they the desire of certain groups, particularly among the Shia and the Kurds, to advance their own interests over the interests of the whole of Iraq, and also the desire of certain neighboring states like Syria and Iran to make sure that America was mired in the Iraqi swamp, so to speak. All of these conspired. All these factors conspired and actually resulted in the insurgency, the start of the insurgency in late 2003, 2004. And I take you back to early to 2004 for a reason. Just like what happened in Syria, exactly, in 2004, we had foreign jihadists. We had Syrians, Jordanians, Sudanese, Libyans, Egyptians, Yemeni, you name it, all sorts of nationalities, flocking to Iraq at the time to support their Sunni brothers, exactly as what happened in Syria. And yes, just like in June 2014, Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq, in the north, fell to the insurgents in November 2004. A lot of people forget that. And I was there with a unit of the U.S. military, actually, at the time, November 2004. And I tell you, I mean, the entire police force of Mosul quit. They just left. And the situation was so dire back then that you would see actually bodies of Iraqi soldiers killed by the insurgents, littering the streets of Mosul. And the only people who had the courage at the time to pick up the bodies of these poor people were the Americans. They were on patrol, they would stop, they would pick up the bodies and take them back to the base. So it was pretty grim. And then, obviously, we all remember the brutality of the predecessors of ISIS, the Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia, Al-Qaeda في بلاد الرافدين عفوا, وبعدين the Islamic became the Islamic State of Iraq. I mean, all of this, the brutality of these groups, plus the financial, cash, Masari, the tribal leaders, they used politics, they used diplomacy, Your Excellency, to try to woo these people to their side. And they managed to actually quell the insurgency. I mean, there was a point when things became relatively normal in Baghdad. We were talking, remember, we were there in 2009, 2010, it was, Baghdad was booming. And then we had the elections in 2010.
But before that, you missed that the Awakening Council.
Right.
Yes, but it was due to the Awakening Councils on Sahwa.
Right.
Okay, so go ahead.
No, this is what I was saying. I mean, the Americans paying the tribes money and wooing them with, politically and diplomatically. Sahwat, yes. So I didn't use the name, but that's what it is. You're right. And then we had the elections in 2010 in Iraq, and there was a real chance. There was a genuine chance of power sharing at the time between Sunnis, Kurds, and Shia. And everyone was involved. Turkey was involved. Saudi Arabia was involved. Qatar, all the regional players, Iran. But again, the timing was bad. The Americans were about to withdraw from Iraq. Then I think the individual players themselves in Iraq were part of the problem. For instance, the Shia had the winner takes it all mentality, mainly Maliki, the Maliki faction. It's like, the Shia are the majority, then we take it all. The Sunnis, some of the Sunni factions had the mentality of the approach of, all or nothing type approach. We want to overturn the whole political process. We're not happy with the political process. And the Kurds, to touch on the Kurds, they wanted, at the time in 2010, they wanted more federalism. That's all they wanted, because it's a constitution. It's enshrined in the Iraqi constitution. They wanted whatever was in the constitution to be applied. And of course, they spoke at the time of, that they also wanted the chance for Kurds to decide their own future and whether they wanted to stay or not. And actually, very interesting, in May 2010, I interviewed the president of the Kurdistan region, Masoud Barzani, and he told me in 2010 that the only hope for stability in Iraq was if Iraq is divided into three federations. Kurds in the north, Sunni in the middle and west, and Shia in the south. And he said, I remember his words, he said, any talk of strongly unified Iraq is like bird dreams and wishes. He used, it was like ahlam al-asafiyya, he spoke in Arabic. And then I had also a very interesting quote from Barham Saleh, who was the prime minister of the Kurdistan region in 2011, just December 2011, just before the Americans left. And he told me the Kurds would not be the ones who divide Iraq. It will be the Shia-Sunni power struggle. Those were his words. So just very quickly, fast forward to the spring of 2013, which was the 10th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. ISIS is in control of Raqqa province in neighboring Syria. This is a province northeast of Syria. They're very active on the border with the Iraqi-Syrian border. They're expanding. They're making a comeback in Iraq. I mean, almost no day went by over the past year without horrific bombings in Baghdad and other parts of Iraq that killed hundreds of people. They barely made the headline. Nobody even talked about them. But people were dying in Iraq in huge numbers. And then, obviously, the situation in Syria was getting worse. There was talk of a spillover into Iraq, into Lebanon, into neighboring countries. And then inside Iraq, I mean, just to touch on what Carol said, the Sunnis were restless, were embittered, I visited some of the protest camps. You visited the Anbar one, right? So I visited the ones in the north. I went to Samarra, I went to Hawija, and I also visited Mosul. And I was struck how these people were only united by one thing only, how to get rid of the Maliki government. And their slogan was, we're coming Baghdad, Qadimun of that. And these people were just so different ideologically. I mean, their goals were different. We're talking about tribal leaders. We're talking about people affiliated to Al-Qaeda, Sunni insurgents, you name it, like a hodgepodge, former regime types from the Ba'ath Party. And they all, shared one goal. I remember the words of one Sunni sheikh in Samarra. And, I mean, just to give you an idea of the mindset of people at the time, it was like, again, an all or nothing approach. They said, finish. Either we do what we want to do to topple the Maliki government, or we die. He said, we have people have burned their ships. It's about being or not being for the Sunnis at the time. So very interesting. So I mean, with that, I'd like to basically wrap it up. So I have to, I mean, the point of all of this is that we have to look at to understand what's happening now in Iraq. We have to understand why Iraq has not been able to, or Iraqis have not been able to build a viable state post-invasion. The same way the Lebanese, I would say, have not been able to build a viable state since the end of the Civil War, Revolution War.
Thank you. Before I take questions, I don't know if you have a moment. Go ahead.
Well, when I was talking about, dramatic developments, I was just talking about referring to the way the Iraqi army has that was just to clarify on that one. And completely agree with you that, what we are witnessing right now is actually a complete failure of post-invasion order, in Iraq. And it's not, Maliki is his politics is the main reason, but it's not the only one. And I think U.S. need for quick exit, and the need to support whoever is in Baghdad, invest in him rather than investing in institutions. That is a huge mistake, and of course, there's a problem.
Okay. Just 3 points very quickly. There's a lesson to be learned from the Awakening Council's experience and why this led to the collapse of the army. It's because the Americans gave those men, as Sam was saying, weapons and money and salaries. And they were, and after they kicked out Al-Qaeda from their areas, before that, they were promised to be incorporated in the army. What happened in Iraq was that contingents of the Southern Brigade and Mehdi Army and the Badr and all of that were taken as is and incorporated in the army. With the Sahwat, they only took 30%. So there was an imbalance in the army, and I've also interviewed a deserter who came to Erbil, and he's a Shia from the south. And when I asked him, why did you leave your post? And he was like, those are not my people. Whom should I protect? And there was a collapse from the top, from the pyramid, and then things fell down across the propaganda, and then Daesh are coming to slaughter and all of that. So I just wanted to make that point clear of how these two were linked. And one more thing about the Americans wanted a quick exit with Maliki. If we remember, in the elections of 2010, the alliance Alawi Tariq al-Hashimi won the elections. And what happened was we saw Bush get on the plane the next day and go to Baghdad and shake hands with Maliki, because Maliki was seen to be the US man in Iraq. And after a long time, after the Awakening Council problem, convincing the Sunnis to take part in the political process, and then the Americans turning their back on them when they won the elections with Tariq al-Hashimi and Alawi alliance and going to Maliki, this created more resentment among the Sunnis as well. So all of this played within the whole Sunni resentment towards Maliki or Dawah or the other factions. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, take questions, 4 or 5 questions, and then we'll give you a chance to answer them. The questions may be for anyone. So, please give your names first.
I'm surprised that there was no connection made between the triple potential alliance between Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And we find that the 2 Arab states have been almost completely demolished. What's going on in Syria, what's going on in Iraq, the millions of people who are displaced. Is there any relationship between a military alliance between these 3 states, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and the balance of power in the Middle East? And what's going on is really to frustrate such an alliance.
Professor Sofia Saadi, I have a question to Mr. Hassan because of your comment about Kurdistan. This is not an Iraqi issue, it's a regional issue. We cannot discuss Kurdistan as if it is only an Iraq issue, because Turkey is involved, since it has a huge Kurdish population and huge territory. 30% of Turkey is Kurdish. And then you have its Kurds in Iran and in Syria. So the main reason why Kurdistan cannot get its independence is due to the fact of those neighboring countries who do not want also to have independent Kurdistan in their own area. And they would be the ones who would force Iran to go into either a federation or unite because of what will happen to them. This is just because we didn't mention that dimension. For Ms. Maruf, about the fact that you said that the population of the people you met told you that Iran is the one that is in situation, which meant liquidating the army, which would lead to those crashes.
I mentioned the mistakes.
Exactly. So this is a huge fault, or intentional fault. I don't know.
المحامي سيمون خوي. You emphasize a lot on على المالكي والأمور الداخلية، الأسباب الداخلية. ما في أسباب دولية لنشاط داعش، وهل الشيء اللي عم بيصير بين العراق وسوريا هل هو الرد على الهلال الشيعي؟
I think it's very similar to the gentleman's question. It's very similar to the gentleman's question.
يعطيكم العافية. محمد شربي علينا. كنت توقع اسمع اشياء اكثر من هيك. في شغله ما سمعتها اللي هي يعني ما سمعت عنها شيء، داعش. كانه داعش شغله هامشيه. وداعش اليوم هي الحدث. يعني ما سمعنا شيء عنها. كانه هي انه الامور بالعراق شغله، داعش هيدا تفصيل. مع انه هي اعلنت خليت اليوم تمتد سلطه داعش، ولولا ما يكون داعش، ليش؟ داعش اليوم سلطه في سوريا وفي العراق. وانه لماذا داعش هذا؟ لماذا عنوان داعش؟ لماذا أعلن الخلافة في الموصل؟ لماذا يعني داعش ليست وليدة اليوم في العراق والأمس. صار من أيام الزرقاوي وقبل الزرقاوي. ذكر الأستاذ حسام شيء، ذكرنا فيه كأنه ما في شيء بالعراق وعملية سياسية فقط. لا، في فريق جذري مثلا الموصل وعزة الدولة جميعا أقوياء في تلك المنطقة وموجودين قبل الخلاف، قبل النهضة هيدي الاعتراضية اللي صارت على المال. الموصل كل 3/4 قيادات جيش صدام من الموصل. يعني كيف ما بدنا نذكرهم حتى بالتفاصيل. الطموح الكردي للاستقلال قديم مش جديد. يعني من الجديد اللي هو انه في شيء اسمه ازاله الحدود السوريه العراقيه، في موقع جديد، في داعش، في عنوان داعش بغض النظر ليست فقط ثوره شعبيه، هذا الخليط مع داعش. اذا لماذا والذي يتصدر هذا العنوان هو داعش وليس المشايخ الدوليمي ولا غير الدوليمي؟ هذا هو الحدث. أنا أريد أن أسمع عن هذا الحدث والتطور والمتغير اللي فرض حاله على كل المنطقة العربية. شكرا.
سألت سؤالي.
كيف تسأل سؤال خلاص؟ ناخذ بعد سؤال. خلاص
لهنا وحداني باحثة اقتصادية. كمان بحب الفت النظر إضافة للي قالوه الأساتذة للمحادثات الأمريكية الإيرانية حول النووي والاجتماع اللي رح يصير هلا بتموز. هل داعش وكل شيء عم بيصير بالعراق هو رد أو نوع من إضافة لهالمحادثات ضغط؟ شغلة ثانية، الشركات نفط عالمية عم توقع عقود بكردستان. كيف عم تسترجي توقع هيك عقود؟ شو الضمانات اللي عم تاخذها؟ شو
Well, this is after the first round. We'll come back in another round. Here we'll start with you, sir.
Maybe I'll focus on two of the questions. The one relating to the sort of regional context, Iran, Syria, Iraq, and the military alliance. And the gentleman here spoke about the Shia crescent, the Levant Shia. I'll also try to address the gentleman's Daesh. So, I mean, first of all, regarding the Iran, Syria, Iraq alliance, so to speak, and the Shia crescent, we have to be very careful about that. First of all, yes, in the case of Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, I totally agree with you. But in the case of Iraq, it's a lot more complicated. I don't think Maliki per se was part of this alliance, or is part of this alliance. Yes, he is very close to Iran, but Iran has a number of instruments in Iraq. And the main instruments are the Shia militias that it trained and backed and supported and continues to fund people like Assad al-Haq, people like Hezbollah al-Iraq, Yom al-Maw'ud, all these people. In fact, when events started in Syria, a lot of these people went over there to fight along the side of the Syrian army and Hezbollah, and all in the name of Shia solidarity. It wasn't Maliki that was sending these people, so I think we have to be very careful about that. Yes, I think definitely that's what you hear in Syria. I'm based in Damascus, and you hear in Syria that the reason we had what we had in Iraq, and the reason Mosul fell, and the reason Daesh, the Islamic State, was able to make the sweep, is because this alliance was winning in Syria, and was gaining territory, was also which allowed the President Assad to secure a third term in office, and this was the direct response to that. I think. Yes, I think the timing is interesting, but I think Of course, there is a connection, but I don't think what happened in Iraq happened because of what's happening in Syria. I think the reason we went into all of this discussion about what's going on internally is to explain, I think, the root causes of the problem. Why we are where we are today is because of all these things that have been happening over the past 10 years in Iraq and Syria and the wider region. And so yes, I mean, I think obviously we can't ignore that there is a power struggle in the region between a certain bloc, led by Iran, and an opposing bloc led by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey. But again, I mean, you would agree with me, even that opposing bloc is not united. I mean, we all know about the fallout between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, the differences between Turkey and Saudi Arabia. So it's not definitely a united front. I think we have to be very careful about drawing these correlations. I mean, while I think the interests of certain parties, I mean, on the face of it, of course, it would seem like Saudi Arabia, on the face of it, is happy with what's going on in Iraq because this is a blow to the Iranian-led alliance. But the reality is much more complicated because Saudi Arabia is actually very fearful that, blowback of these people coming back to, carry out attacks inside Saudi Arabia. And we're hearing now, actually, from U.S. officials in Baghdad that Saudi Arabia may be interested in cooperating with Maliki at this point if it means potentially, at least, dealing with the immediate threat of these people coming into Saudi Arabia to carry out attacks. And obviously, we have the broader context of this. I mean, what happened in Iraq in 2004, when Zarqawi went to Iraq and started Jihad al-Tawheed, and then obviously that morphed into Al-Qaeda fi Bilad al-Rafidain, and then became the Islamic State in Iraq. I mean, at the time, we didn't have Twitter, we didn't have social media, but it was happening. All these fighters were going there. The difference now in Syria is, with the social media, with Twitter, with Facebook, we have all these people coming from Europe, from America to Syria to fight under the banner of the Islamic State. I think that's the huge difference in terms of the appeal of something like the Islamic Caliphate and its ability to reach people around the world. This affected youth in Europe, this affected youth in America. I think that's the real difference. That's the real danger that we're confronting now. But trust me, it's exactly the same thing. 2004, Mosul fell. You have the same foreign jihadists. And I totally agree with you, by the way, in terms of Mosul was completely under control of the Ba'athists, and even the Islamic State at the time was levying some sort of actually the word in Iraq is atalat, jizya, like a tax on all shopkeepers in Mosul. You have to pay a certain amount of money. So anyway, so I'll wrap it up.
Sure. Well, just in addition to what Sam said about Daesh, I think Daesh is the public face of something bigger. It's a visible public face, but beneath it is legitimate concerns of communities. At the same time, expatriates who want to come back to power. I mean, this is a very complex constellation. We have to see that, But why? How did we arrive here? I mean, that should be the question. And I think Daesh is brutal and extreme, but it has four advantages, in my view. It's got a powerful narrative, it's got money, it's got territories, and it's got recruits, and they will increase. This is my fear. I mean, there will be, of course, action against Daesh at some point, but we should not underestimate its impact on youth. I mean, I live in Holland. We should not underestimate the impact of now also the appearance of Baghdadi himself on, we should not underestimate this. And how to address it? We have to go back to the root causes. I mean, it's clear, that's how you should, address it. And I think there was a turning point. As-Sahawat was a good success. I mean, U.S. messed up, but they did also some good things in Iraq. And Sahawat was one of them. We should acknowledge that. It's not all the, U.S. is not responsible for all the failures in Iraq. that was a turning point, a milestone, a success. Now we are back, unfortunately, to maybe to 2006, but with a completely new dimensions and dynamics. Add to that, right? Regarding the Kurdish issue, and that, of course, Turkey and Iran is against. As I said, I started my talk by referring to what the Iranian ambassador told the Kurdish politician Soleimani 2 days back. So that's clear cut. I think the position of Turkey has changed over time. I think over the since 2008, the position of Turkey regarding the Kurdish issue has changed considerably, both towards Kurdish issue in Turkey and in Iraq too. We can't underestimate the economic leverage of Turkey in Iraqi Kurdistan. This economic interdependence is real, things could change positions, but Iran will remain, vehemently against the idea of the Kurdish state.
Thank you.
Yes, I want to reply to the gentleman and to Mrs. Rahman. There is a polygamous marriage of convenience today between Daesh, the Ba'athists you talked about, the tribes, and most importantly, the host community. We have to understand that Daesh in Syria and in Iraq cannot survive إذا ما في بيئة حاضنة. البيئة الحاضنة اليوم, or the host community, is there because of everything we spoke about. So where we started today, even if there was regional interferences, and even if there was pumping of money, and even there is a foreign agenda, if the locals are not favorable of that, they would expel it with Masar Ma'a awakenings. So, and this will come. That marriage, polygamous marriage of convenience, is going to break. راح يصير في divorce. ولكن it's conditional. The condition is the end of Maliki and Dawah. So if the Americans are clear and they understand this, and this is, I think, what they're doing, they're pushing Maliki out. And if they manage to push Maliki out and bring the moderate Sunnis to the table, then they can strike a deal with them, and then they will be able to take out Daesh. Another thing, I was in Dubai before coming here, and I met with a senior FSA commander who was at some point in Raqqa.
Syrian Army commander.
Free Syrian Army, and he was telling me that around between 500 and 800 Daesh fighters married local Syrian women in Raqqa, and they have families. Now this is dangerous, but it is an advantage in Bisharite. It's dangerous because if Daesh becomes part of the social fabric of that region, then this is difficult to get rid of. So the longer the Americans wait, like they did with Syria, to interfere in pushing Daesh out, they will become part of the social fabric of Iraq, and that is a very big problem. On the other hand, and that was his point of view, that if Daesh are those foreign jihadists who had nothing to lose and going with the death wish, يعني أنا جاية تموت. إذا أنا بصير عندي, if I have a family, would that refrain me and calm me down from becoming that suicide bomber? يعني them having that social fabric, how does it work? Is it a positive or a negative? And this is something for us to think about. How does this affect the local community? So, to wrap the Daesh up before I go to the Kurdistan issue, is that Daesh هي نتيجة وليست مسبب. It is. You see that they attacked Saudi Arabia. There was bombing at the borders from Iraq yesterday. على Saudi border, 3 rockets fell. And there is not a single word about Safawiya or Iran or anything from that account against Iran. It is now totally against Saudi Arabia. So Kamil, this poses a question mark على what is the relationship between Daesh, Iran, Daesh, and Saudi Arabia, somebody asked in the regional context. very briefly about Kurdistan and oil. What happened in the Kurdish, in the Iraqi national, in the constitution, the contested areas of Kirkuk and Mosul, where the oil is between the Kurds and the Arabs, the revenues go to the central government, and from that they distribute the percentages accordingly. So when the Kurds came and said, right, but we want to develop our own fields, Maliki was like, but we don't have the money to do that because it costs hundreds of millions of dollars. So what they did was went to companies like Car Group and small oil companies and gave them the permission to look for the oil and to extract the oil. Now when this happened and those companies invested and they told them we'll share the revenue, ExxonMobil came and bought those companies. So ExxonMobil came in because there was a successful model. They did not start from scratch. There was already something there that they had bought. And this was what I was talking about with the Athir Nujayfi deal. You know, they would replicate that model with those small companies in Mosul in fields that were not previously part of the national which is something purely Kurdish. And the central government in Iraq رفع الدعوة عليهم, and the Kurds won it last week because it was in the constitution that the high court, yes, the federal court حكم لكردستان انه they were right to do that. So this is why the Sunnis are in favor of dividing, because they can then have their own oil. Exactly. So they want to replicate the same one. And now Kurdistan is at 132,000 barrels. By December they will be at 400,000, which the revenues are made higher than the 17% that they used to get from the central government. So it is more financially viable as a solution than to get the percentage from the central government.
But they need to sell it. But they need to sell it.
They are selling it. But at 20% less than the price.
It's a very important point about, she's spoken about, Carol's spoken about the B al-Fadl. Can I comment?
You're going to get a lot of questions.
Because I completely disagree with her that, Daesh has B al-Fadl.
Nasib Gabriel. Ms. Marouf, you mentioned a little bit earlier about the Maliki support. And I don't know if you read the op-ed piece in the Washington Post about an American official who said Maliki was handpicked by the United States. He was an obscure figure and was identified by the United States and was propped up to become prime minister, and then they turned against him. After everything that happened, most of the blame has to go to Maliki because he monopolized power, even among the Shiites in Iraq. There was a lot of corruption. The army collapsed in Mosul so easily not because the Daesh was overpowering, but because of the corruption in the army, because of the poor choice of generals and military people. And now he's he's refusing to share power, to step down. He's refusing to share power, and he continues to be supported by the most powerful person in Iraq, who's not even Iraqi, who is Iranian. How do you see this ending? Do you see at all the possibility of having not a solution, but even a continuation of an central Iraqi state? And the second point is, despite everything that's being said about the difficulties of seeing an independent Kurdistan, I see this economically very feasible. I mean, they have huge oil reserves, they have bigger population than most Gulf monarchies, and as long as oil companies come in and Turkey allows exports from Kurdistan, it's a very reality that they will become an independent state.
صلاح شكرا للدعوة وللمناظرين. عندي سؤالين. السؤال الأول كثير صغير لست كارول، بيتعلق بانتخابات 2010 وكيف اجى المالكي رغم انه علاوي هو اللي اخذ اصوات عدد نواب اكبر. كانت مش عارفة إنه المالكي وحزب الدعوة حليف أساسي لإيران بالعراق، أم إنه هيدا جزء من صفقة عملتها أمريكا مثل ما عملت صفقات بانسحابها من أفغانستان والتتري؟ السؤال الأكبر، إذا بدنا نجمل الحكي اللي انحكى عراقي، العراق مثل ما أنا شايف متجه إلى التقسيم. مش عم بحكي بالفيدرالية، الفيدرالية وضعها غير، أنا عم روح لأبعد شوي اللي هو موضوع التقسيم. وسؤالي هو التالي: في حال بدها تبلش بدايات التقسيم بالعراق اللي حتكون شغلة طويلة وممتدة ويمكن فيها آلام كثيرة، شو هو موقف، كيف حيتطور موقف اللاعبين الأساسيين بالعراق اليوم، واللي هن برأيي أنا إيران، أمريكا والسعودية؟ شكرا.
أنا عندي ملاحظتين. أول شيء من يسمع من يلي سمعنا بيأدي انه اختيار السني بالعراق لداعش مع كل سيئات او جرائمها مقابل رفض لحكم المالكي، معنى ذلك انه المالكي اسوأ من داعش. ثاني شيء، نشكر ايران على سياستها بالمنطقه لانها عم بتوحد العالم السني. شكرا.
Carol, how do you see the impact of all what's going on now, Daesh, etc., on the current U.S. and Iran talks over the nuclear matter? Really, personally, I think this is 90% related to those talks. If you could elaborate, it would be great.
مرحبا، محمد سويد, the Diet General. Who do you think are the beneficiaries of what's going on right now? And what do you think, or what strategic objectives they are pursuing? This is number one. Number two, do you think the Americans are far away and surprised of what's going on, or they have a finger somewhere in it? Thank you. And why? If the answer is yes. Thank you.
Grazie, بحاجة سفير. سؤالي عن المواطن العراقي. يعني حضرتكم كصحفيين أكيد قابلتوا مع مسؤولين وأيضا مع الشعب العادي. هذا الشعب سواء كان مسيحي ولا سني ولا شيعي ولا كردي، كيف ينظر إلى ما يحصل في العراق؟ هل هو معني أصلا بالموضوع ولا بس مفعول فيه؟ يعني ما مفعول فيه كل ما يحصل من عنف، وهو بالآخر يشكل هذه البيئة الحاضنة اللي كنت عم تحكوا عنها.
Any other question before we go?
Okay. There's a lot to answer, so if I forget something, please remind me. I will start with Mr. Bobby's the op-ed that was in the Washington Post. I think the gentleman's name was Ali or something like this. And the issue with Maliki is Maliki led with the Americans the surge with Petraeus. The Iraqi army was working closely with the Americans. So he has a certain favorability with the Bush administration and George Bush. I mentioned, if you remember, George Bush at some point, the day that they threw the shoe at him, he did a surprise visit to Maliki to show support for him. So Maliki, at some point, as the guy said, was our man in the U.S. The experiences with Ja'fari and the rest was not that great. And I think that he showed that he could also manage the political scene. But at least underneath it was boiling underneath. But I think the Americans were just concerned with the surface and with their withdrawal. So at any cost, I think they were willing to withdraw with some. Unfortunately, they also invested a lot of money in that army, which collapsed overnight. And billions were made to make an Iraqi army that did not survive. The Dawa alliance with Iran, I think, is key. However, there has been a lot of Shia objection to Maliki's policies coming from Muqtada Sadr, from Al-Hakim, and هلا كمان Sistani is also favorable of changing al-Maliki. So Dawa, مثل ما حكينا they are linked to some militias, وعصائب أهل الحق and the others. So they are also perceived by some Shia elements to not be كمان corrupt في هذا. So we also have to be clear that the Shia alliance is not one. It is divided, three different points of view, and not everybody agrees with what Maliki is doing. And if you want my opinion, I think this is the end of Maliki. This is almost his way out. The legitimate successor to Maliki came at some point in a name called Tariq Najm, but Tariq Najm is also down. So now, after Osama al-Mujahid said that he is not going to run for speaker anymore, so there is some form of political.
Also the chief of staff of Maliki.
This is chief of staff. So Kamen can feel Personally, I really don't have a name at the moment. I don't know if the gentlemen have heard of something, but for now, I think there is going to be some form of a settlement training. I don't think any name.
Chalabi and
Chalabi. Okay. The division. Somebody asked about the division of if Iraq would be divided into three. I think you did. One of the biggest problems that we have to think of, while this was happening in Mosul and I was there, there was a convention for Al-Ahwaz for the first time in Paris that cost millions of dollars. So I don't think it's a coincidence that the Americans brought Rudy Giuliani and all the right America, with the right in France with Mujahidi Khalq and their leader Rajavi to talk about the rights of the Sunnis in Iran, which coincided with what was happening in Iraq. And the second issue is and this is something probably for you to tell us.
I don't think the American government has anything to do with
it. It has nothing to do with the American government, but there was a strong U.S. right-wing presence in that conference, which is a fact. Yeah.
But the government has nothing to do with that.
I didn't say it was government. Right. But the other thing is that if the Iraqi Kurds are allowed to be independent, what happens to the Kurds in Turkey and the Kurds in Iran? And in Syria, and would that also mobilize the movements inside those countries? So I think, in my opinion, no matter how the alliance today between Barzani and Erdogan is great, and Barzani said that he would give Erdogan in the first time ever direct elections, presidential elections, the 15% vote of the Kurds that the KGP have in Turkey to Erdogan. So اليوم في مثل مصلحة بين الأتراك والأكراد. But what happens to Diyarbakir and what happens to the other Kurdish areas in Iran? I think this is maybe something for you to look at. So we have to look at the regional players and how they see this affecting them internally. بموضوع nuclear talks, Mr. Waidul, I wish I sat on those tables to know exactly what is happening. But we all know that Iran holds more than one card on the negotiating table, and definitely, it is a no-brainer that this is a card that they would negotiate on. Daesh happened because of the talks. The talks are what they will do to Daesh and Mosul. هذا شيء not at my level صراحة. I cannot. This would be speculation. But what I can say is, we all know that Iran holds all those cards and they play poker. So بيلعبوا مع شغلتين، بيلعبوا الكاردز وبيلعبوا الوقت. So the element of time is always to their favor. وبدي اختم هيدا الشيء، بدي اقول شغله. Petraeus, I used to work for Al Jazeera English for 5 years. 4 of them was in Doha, and I was in charge. I was Middle East editor, senior Middle East producer in charge of the Middle East. And part of what I was in charge of was the central command, قاعدة الأعداد، هي القاعدة العسكرية. And one day, Petraeus comes to Al Jazeera, and we were sitting with him, and we asked him about Iran. And he said, we make fast food, and they weave carpets. And this is the difference between us. نحن بدنا نعمل الهامبرجر وبدنا إياها هلا وامبارح، بس هن عندهم الوقت إنه يقعدوا يعملوا سجادة, and it takes forever. So whenever we look at Iran, I think we should, Iran and the US, I think this is a very good analogy that we put on the table. They take their time, so we always have to.
They have patience and time. They have patience and time, and I think those are the words to describe the Iranian attitude and policies. About ordinary Iraqis, and I'd just like to draw your attention to this article published yesterday in Financial Times, Iraq: A Divided Future, and it talks about the views of ordinary Iraqis. And when you have continuous violence, brutality, injustice, whether it doesn't matter from which part you are. I think at some point, these brutalities and violence create life of their own. They create new realities. So, if you read this article, Sunnis say, maybe at some point, they say, in the past we refused a Sunni region, but maybe that is now the only solution. So that's the issue. I don't know whether it will next the view of all Sunnis, but that's how people think about the situation. Regarding the impact of an independent Kurdistan on Syria and on Turkey, I think it will empower Kurds. It will empower them definitely, in their quest for more autonomy in Turkey and in Syria. But we should be reminded that in Syria, PYD is the most powerful political group, which is an offshoot of PKK. And there's a huge struggle between PKK and KDP. As far as Turkey is concerned, I think again there was an article in Financial Times last week, and the Turkish official said, we might vote for Erdogan because Erdogan is. His view and policies have changed, not because they love us as Kurds, but because they are very pragmatic. And for us as Kurds, they are, at the moment, the best solution, because he is much better in breaking political taboos than others.
Let me ask you a quick question before we give it to Sam. What's the population of Kurds in each of these countries, including Iran? Dawa?
Well, I think this is a very tricky issue, the figures, because it's a very political thing. But Kurds love to say we are 40 million. Kurds love to say we are 40 million, but there are no official consensus. In Iraq, it's somewhere between 5 and 5.5 million. Syria, it's around 2 million. Turkey around 15 million, Iran somewhere between 5 to 8 million, somewhere in between. We don't have exact figures.
Thank you. Last word, Sam.
Thank
Thanks. I'd like to touch on our colleagues' question about what Iraqis think about what's going on, and maybe also talk about how Syrians think about what's going on and the rise of Daesh and the Islamic Caliphate. First of all, I would differ with my colleague here, Carol, who said that there is bi'ahadimi, or there's a society that embraces Daesh in places like Mosul or other parts of Iraq or in Syria. What they see as the dictatorial policies of Maliki and the overbearing policies of, the failed policies, they're more like failed policies of the central government in Baghdad. So I think we have to be very careful about this issue of whether there is societal support for these groups. I mean, in the case of Syria, the only reason they were welcomed initially by the rebels were fighting the regime is they thought they were on the same side. These were brothers coming to fight with us against the regime, and we had Jabhat al-Nusra, and we had the Islamic State of Iraq, roughly all kind of on the same page, during a certain period of the conflict. And then obviously we all know what happened, when Zarqawi wanted Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi to go back to Iraq and leave Syria for Jabhat al-Nusra and Jolani, and there was the breakup. I think this is fascinating. The fascinating aspect of it is the challenge that Daesh and ISIS is posing to Al-Qaeda, to the mothership. I think that's incredible. That's a very fascinating aspect of what's going on that we should examine further. So again, we remember what happened early on when Al-Qaeda took root in Iraq. It brutalized people, and eventually people rose up against Al-Qaeda, and the Al-Qaeda threat in Iraq was quelled. But certain events and certain things happened, and certain mistakes and certain policies by the central government, and the perception among most Sunnis that they're being treated unfairly by Baghdad actually put them in this position. But I think long term, there's no place for ISIS in Mosul, in Samarra, in Tikrit, or even in Raqqa. I mean, Raqqa was as our friend here noted, has a significant Christian population. It was a vibrant city at one point, but the vacuum created. Let's go back to what happened in Raqqa in 2013 in March. Basically, the local authorities, local provincial authorities, handed over power to representatives of the Islamist rebels, including the Islamic State. There's a famous video. You just go back to YouTube and you'll see it. They're all sitting in the office of the governor of Raqqa with representatives of the Islamic State and Jabhat al-Nusra and all the others, saying, take over the province. We don't want to fight you. And obviously, the government in Damascus had other priorities and wasn't interested in starting a fight in Raqqa or starting a battle to retake Raqqa. There were other important battles to fight in Homs and Damascus and Aleppo. So they just let it sit. They let it kind of play out, which is part of the strategy of the Syrian regime, is just let things kind of just play out and let's see what happens. And hence, the temptation on the part of many people to say that, ISIS and the Syrian regime are together, they're one, they're coordinating. Yes, I think their interests may have come together at certain times, but I think it's more complicated than that. I will just touch very briefly on the issue of the gentleman's question about the nuclear talks, and I don't think they're related at all. I'll tell you why. First of all, the nuclear talks have been going on for years, right? This is not new at all. So, and second of all, the people, you have to look at Iran itself. In Iran, the president and the foreign minister, who are very much involved in these talks, have nothing to do with like the state issues, the Syria file, the Iraq file. Those files are under the purview of Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Revolutionary Guard. So you have to look at the dichotomy in Iran. So I think, of course, the Americans would like for the Iranians to cooperate on Iraq and to cooperate on Syria. But I can share with you what someone who's actually very close to this talks told me recently. He said the Americans were telling the Iranians, look, let's solve it all together, one package. The nuclear issue, Iraq, Syria, let's do it all. The Iranian delegation turned around and said, look, we can't do it that way. We just have to focus on the nuclear talks now. If we are successful with this issue, then you have basically empowered us, empowered Rouhani, empowered Zarif, who can turn around to Ali Khamenei and say, the Murshid Ala, Ayatollah Khamenei, and say, look, we've succeeded. Why don't you let us also try to find a solution in Iraq and Syria as well? I mean, that's according to people who were close to the talks. I just would like to share that with you.
Thank you. Before we finish, I have a friend who has a lot of interest in this part of the world that we're talking about. His grandfather came from Diyarbakir.
I speak in Arabic to be very precise. عندنا مشكلة ما بدنا نعتقد إن عندنا مشكلة. هي منطقة متنوعة متعددة قوميات وإثنيات. كل النماذج سقطت. الدولة المدنية سقطت، الدولة الديكتاتورية سقطت، الميليشيات سقطت. نحن بأزمة كبيرة لا نريد أن نعترف. ولا حدا عنده نموذج جيد لإدارة هذا التنوع في المنطقة. الأبطل بيبكي بمصر، العربي بيبكي بفلسطين بالاحتلال، الشيعي بيبكي بإسرائيل، الشيعي بيبكي بالبحرين، السني بيبكي بإيران، الكردي بيبكي بأربع دول. كلنا عندنا أزمة ما بدنا نعترف. المشكلة اللي معنا تحكي عنها أكثر إنه في شيء جديد على المنطقة هو هذه الأصولية السلفية التكفيرية. ونحن عم نخبر أصبحنا عنده مش موجود ولا بمحل حتى اللي قائمين على الدكتاتوريات يعني نحن ضدها فيها. إذا اسمه بشار ولا اسمه مالكي ولا اسمه شو ما كان، مالكي عنده 10,000 غلطة، لكن ولا بمحل عم بيصير في حكم آخر عم بيفرضوا نموذج أحسن. يعني ولا بمحل اليوم بالموصل ولا بالرقة ولا بكذا ما حدا عم فرجينا نموذج يعيش أفضل باحترام الآخر. بده هلا بالموصل أو بالأنبار أو غيره بده يروحوا مساجد السنة كذلك. ويا أستاذ هاني عندنا نموذج للسنة كمان مش بس ما عم وحده السنة إن بده يفحشوا حتى الكعبة ضد المساجد الشيعية وضد المساجد. فبدنا نعتمد على المشكلة ونشوف كيف بدنا المنطقة كلها تفوت على العقل الجديد وتقول مش مشكلة اسمها أصولية واسمها داعش، اسمها غيرها في ديكتاتوريات كمان مشكلة. وهذا سؤال على كلمة حتى على الإفكار الكردي اللي له حق إنه يفكر بده يعمل فيدرالية بيقول إنه كمان الأشوري له حق يعمل فيدرالية وبمناطق اللي هم سيطر عليها. هذا بده يروح مع وضد مش بس من طرف واحد. العرب بيقولوا كمان الأكراد لهم حق وكمان اللي منهم عرب لهم حق. ولكن مع الاسف هذه المنطقه مش جايه على هذا النموذج، جايه على النموذج السيء. ان شاء الله يكون في وعي غربي وعربي واسلامي انه نحن بحاجه الى شيء جديد. الحين عم نستلم هذه البعض.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Kawa. Thank you.